on this episode of the Literature for Homeschoolers podcast.
I've been a hero worshiper since the time I was a little kid, but people who had real ability and put it in service of human life, advanced human life in one way or another. They fought for liberty, or they cured diseases, or they explored the world. So I weaned myself on that. And now I see, in the modern world, in popular culture, there's still, a lot of love for heroes. I can see Captain America on the wall behind you is a good example.
What makes a hero, and why are they important to us? Our guest today is Dr. Andrew Bernstein, who's written a great book called Heroes, Legends, Champions, Why Heroism Matters. And he's here to talk about the importance of heroes, particularly to young people. Dr. Bernstein has a PhD in philosophy and has taught philosophy at several New York area colleges, including Marist, Hunter, and Marymount colleges. He's spoken at top elite college campuses, including Harvard, Yale, Stanford, University of Chicago, West Point, Columbia, and many others. He's written several books on political philosophy, on the nature of capitalism, and he's even written 2 novels featuring, you guessed it, strong heroes. And now, here's the interview. Philosopher, writer, teacher, novelist, professor, international lecturer, radical capitalist, Dr. Andrew Bernstein. Welcome to the Literature for Homeschoolers podcast. Did I miss anything in that?
That's an impressive introduction, Sean.
Thanks.
Thank you, and it's good. It's good to be here.
I was going to add swashbuckling philosopher, but that's a lot of adjectives.
Yeah, it sure is. I'm just a kid from Brooklyn, so it's hard to kind of assimilate.
Yeah, so's the guy on my wall here. He's just a kid from Brooklyn too.
Steve Rogers, that's right.
Yeah, something you have in common.
Correct.
Yeah. All right, well, we're here to talk about your book, Heroes, Legends, Champions, Why Heroism Matters. This was released in February of 2020. Is that right?
I think the release date was January 20th.
Yeah, okay. All right, so it was released in 2020. This is a subject that's near and dear to our hearts here at the Bazan Academy, since the entire theme for our middle school literature curriculum centers on heroes. Mm-hmm. How to find them, how to understand them, and how we learn from them. So I'm very excited to speak to the man who literally wrote the book on the subject. So first of all, what made you personally write this book? Why was it important to you?
Well, I've been a hero worshiper since the time I was a little kid. Without giving you any of the gory details, I grew up in a classically dysfunctional family. And the world's crazy. There's a lot of good things that happen, and there's a lot of good people, but there's endless violence and warfare, and slavery still exists in large parts of the world. So I grew up in a crazy family in a crazy world, and heroes. I basically weaned myself, looking back on it now, on reading about heroes in both fiction and nonfiction. Individuals, regardless, either gender, whatever race or nationality or tribe or time period, but people who had real ability and put it in service of human life. They did things that helped advance human life in one way or another. They fought for liberty, or they cured diseases, or they explored the world. And they overcame significant obstacles to reach life-giving achievements. So I weaned myself on that. I was always a hero worshiper. It was always a topic that I loved. And now I see, in the modern world, so many, in popular culture, there's still, a lot of love for heroes. I can see Captain America on the wall behind you is a good example. Popular culture, people are starved for the sight of heroes. But in the intellectual world, for the most part, the anti-hero mentality abounds. Heroes are not admired. If you're a hero worshiper, they'll mock you. What do you
tell me what you mean a little bit by the intellectual circles? What do you mean by that?
Well, for instance, the humanities professors in the universities, the professors.
Academia.
Yeah, academia, the literary critics, the film critics, a lot of the writers, and and a lot of the teachers, again, teaching it may be different in the science programs and math and business. I'm not sure. I'm a humanities guy. I mean, like, I was a literature major in college, and my PhD's in philosophy. I was always a humanities guy. And even in the high schools, a lot of the humanities people, the English teachers, the history teachers, a lot of them tend to, scoff at heroes. They don't believe in it. To be serious is to recognize that, we grow up in we're shaped by our environment, we're molded by our families, we're a creature of our environment. Nobody can rise up out of it and do great things. So I'm troubled by this, and I want to point out to intelligent people who are readers, how important heroes are in our lives for multiple reasons. So that was what motivated me to write the book.
Yeah. So as you found this as like a course of study that you wanted to go through, I wanted to talk about the process by which you explored this subject. Like, how did you go about answering these questions, and how do you even come up with a definition for the word hero?
Yeah, that was challenging because in the 19th century, Joel. The good news is, heroes were widely admired, and there was a serious topic of discussion about, with great intellectuals, whether I agree with them or not, but leading intellectuals like, Frederick Nietzsche, William James, Nietzsche, of course, a famous philosopher, James, maybe one of the greatest psychologists of history, and the founder of the American Philosophic School of Pragmatism. Thomas Carlyle, a famous literary figure. Herbert Spencer, famous sociologist, philosopher. This was a serious discussion, and heroism was taken seriously. But nobody that I could find when I was doing the research on this offered a definition of hero. And continuing into the 20th century, the American philosopher Sidney Hook at NYU wrote, I think of it as the Hook book, but I think the title of it is The Hero in History. Peter Gibbons wrote an interesting book. I think was it called The Heroism? But nobody defines it. And so that was a challenge. And so what I did was, and here, I'm a big Ayn Rand guy. I've loved Ayn Rand's books and philosophy since I was a little kid. And she gave us the method on how we form concepts by a process of integration and differentiation. And so I did it by looking at a whole bunch of different kinds of people. There's people who live an honest life. They're good people, but they don't do noteworthy, extraordinary things. I gave a bunch of examples. And then there are people who are kind of sad. I've known people in my life. It's very sad. There's nothing that really moves them. There's nothing they love, and they just kind of seem to drift through life, kind of aimless. And then there's really bad people, murderers, and a whole bunch, many examples of those. And then there are some people who do extraordinary things to promote human life. I had a whole bunch of examples, from all these different types of people. And I said, well, we need classifications. We need somehow we need to form the classification honest person and murderer, and something for the people who do great things and overcome daunting obstacles to advance human life. And I think that's how we form the concept of hero. So it's in the book focus on that.
It is amazing that with all those with that much phenomena to study, that there haven't been a lot of scholarly works on the subject. But what I noticed now after reading your book was that your approach was noteworthy in and of itself. I mean, you mentioned Ayn Rand as providing a method to study subjects like this, and I'd even go back to Aristotle. Your approaches seem to be very Aristotelian. He would go out to his lagoon and just observe the various flora and fauna and classify them. When he wanted to understand how plays work in his poetics, he would read or he would watch a lot of plays. When he wanted to discover the nature of human behavior, he observed a lot of people. And you did a lot of that in your book. You provide a lot of examples.
Right. And go back to Aristotle, when he wrote on the politics, he gathered every constitution from every
Right.
state he possibly could. The technical word for this in logic is he was very inductive, and that is you starting with observational details, what we can actually observe through our senses, our eyes, our ears, our sense of touch, and then pull the principles right out of the examples, the principles that explain what this kind of animal is as distinct from this kind of animal. And so the explanatory principles then are grounded in fact, in observed fact. That is the method of science. It's the method of rational philosophy, and I learned it from Ayn Rand because I read her long before I studied Aristotle. But you're right; it goes back to Aristotle. It's an inductive method. Start with observed facts, and then look for the principles that explain the facts. And a lot of observed facts, in the Hero book and in these two thinkers that we're discussing.
And they're not esoteric facts that you describe in your books. These are examples of people that we can know or imagine or come in contact with or read about. So it's not like you're providing examples that are outside the range of human experience. And so I think that's noteworthy that your approach itself comes to a conclusion in a much more grounded way. And so you don't start out with the definition. That's the interesting thing about this book. You don't start out with the definition for the word hero at the very beginning. You're basically taking a sample, a really big sample, and then inducing an idea from that.
Right. I wanted to show how the concept of hero is derived from reality, from the observation of facts. I mean, we start with a definition, like with a dictionary definition. I went through some of the dictionary definitions. The American Heritage Dictionary, 5th edition, is considered definitive for American English, the way the OED is for British English. But lexicographers do their work, and their definitions are based on usage. That's not a knock on them. That's their job. To get a definition for a highly moral term like hero is the job of philosophers. And so, that's the task I set myself. Let's look at human life. There's so many different kinds of human beings. Some are honest. I'm not even talking about superficial differences like gender, race, nationality, tribe, or things like that. But real serious differences. Some people are dishonest. Some are honest. Some are peaceful. Some are violent. Some hold this set of moral principles that are religious. Some hold this set that are secular. Some have a bad temper and can get violent, and some don't. There's all kinds of important differences here. So I want to look at a broad range of different kinds of human beings and show, by process of integration and differentiation, what the concept hero means in actual life, in the actual life of people, as grounded in observation of fact.
And that is in the title of your book, Why Heroism Matters. And we, again, at the Pizan Academy, it strikes a responsive chord in us because we use the idea of heroes as a way to pull our students, our subscribers, the parents who want to educate their children and find a better life for them. We use this idea of heroes to capture the imagination of young people. So in the title of your book, Why Heroism Matters, tell us, why would this matter, not just to the student, but to the parent?
Yeah, and to every rational human being, it should matter for at least two reasons why we should be very, very interested in heroes. One is that heroes promote human life on a grand scale. For example, we just had this massive pandemic around the world, right? What was this? This is June 2020. So it still is this COVID-19 pandemic. I don't know how many people died. Many. How many people got sick? Many. whole economies were shut down, leading to was going to be terrible economic consequences. More people died, from being locked up in their homes and losing their income. I'm guessing. All of it is very sad. Somebody at some point will develop a vaccine, for this. Put in God knows how many hours of work, research, and not just the hours of work in researching and developing, a vaccine for this specific virus, but all the hours of work getting to the point where you're capable of doing that. Where you're an MD or you're a biologist, all that training that you went through, uncovering nature's secrets, resolving these kind of intractable medical problems in medical research takes an enormous amount of perseverance, and it has tremendous life promoting results. It's heroic, and heroes are heroic in different ways. Sometimes they risk their lives. I mean, the doctors who are treating all of these sick patients are risking their lives and bringing medical expertise to this and saving a lot of lives. There's all different ways in which heroes promote human life. So, one of my personal heroes has always been George Washington. To point out the flaws here, we know he was a slave owner. We point that out. But he also did any number of great things, and he may well be the single most important person in founding the freest country of history. So I certainly risked his life, in fighting the British, and and things like that. So one reason we need to be very concerned with heroes and be very admiring of them is they, in practical terms, make our lives better. They win wars of liberty. They write great novels or symphonies or musical compositions. They cure diseases. They learn how to grow crops and feed the human race, and so on and so on. And the second reason is for inspirational value. I mean, I see that. So I don't have the genius of some of the people that I focused on in my book. Maria Montessori, the great child educator, George Washington Carver, the great agricultural scientist. I don't have that kind of genius. I don't have George Washington's leadership abilities, but I have a certain level of talent. We all do, and that level can be cultivated. It can be nurtured. It can be grown. And the main point is, if I have the dedication to these life promoting values that the great heroes do, well, what might I achieve in my life? If I become a hero worshiper, greatly admiring these heroes, and use that to become a hero emulator, seeking to emulate them to the best, to be the best version of myself, develop my abilities to the best, and do the best I can in my life and for the people around me, in my purview. I might live a much better life, letting myself be inspired by these great men and women. So I think for both reasons, I think our concern with heroes should be very high.
So on the one hand, in your first example, we can look at the proper understanding of heroism allows us to evaluate the heroic individuals around us, and therefore evaluate them with a proper sense of justice. So it's
Right.
In that first example, it's really a matter of understanding what it means. Therefore, we can give a proper evaluation for the sake of justice.
Yeah, definitely,
Mhm.
and have a sense of appreciation and gratitude for all the great things around us. I mean, was broad daylight right now, but we could do this at nighttime with the lights turned on, and just remember the many hours of agonizing effort that Thomas Edison and his team put into the process of inventing the light bulb. And I salute across the centuries, like Equality does in Ayn Rand's great novel Anthem. I salute him across this. Thank you, for that. I mean, this is. He made a lot of money on it. I'm sure it was good. He earned it. I'm sure he had a great sense of pride and satisfaction in this. That's good. He earned it, and he benefited us enormously. So the gratitude that I feel towards these people who've so profoundly improved our lives, I think it is. You're right. It's a type of justice.
And gratitude is a good word to throw in there as well, because when we evaluate our heroes properly, the act of giving gratitude it's really it's really an expression of our values.
Yeah, definitely. That if most people I think around the world. They want to live. There are suicide bombers. But that tends to be very rare,
Well, it would have to be, otherwise the human race as such would not last very long.
Good point. That's good observation. Good observation. It's good common sense. Most people want to live. They want their children to flourish. They value human life for the most part. There are obviously too many murderers in the world, but most of us value human life, and therefore if we recognize what these heroes have done, especially the obstacles they've often overcome, to reach these great achievements. You're right. It's with real gratitude that that I think of. I was born and raised in America. I could have been born and raised in Rwanda, during the genocide in 1994. It's luck of the draw, where you were born. And I was born and raised in the United States, was the freest country in history, which is open to great achievement. So I have great admiration for and gratitude for the founders, even though I recognize, some of them were slave owners, very wrong. Need to fix that. Some of them were seriously flawed human beings, but I focus on the great achievements and the life-giving achievements of the American founders with great respect and great gratitude.
That make a lot of the life that we have today possible.
Yes.
So now I don't want to give short shrift to your second point, and that's the nature of inspiration that heroes give us. So let's talk a little bit about inspiration, because this really dovetails into the value that our audience might see in the idea of heroism. What can inspiration do for a person, particularly the inspiration of heroes?
Well, one of the examples I use in the book of a towering hero or an epic hero was the Antarctic explorer Ernest Shackleton. The survival.
We actually used him in our middle school curriculum last year.
Great. It's great. The survival story of Shackleton and his team is so off the charts that you couldn't make this stuff up. If you wrote this as a novel, people would think, no, that's not. It's too unbelievable. What they overcame to sort of, there was the trial by sea and then the trial by land on scaling these unpassable peaks that had never been scaled, only been done once since, and they weren't mountaineers to start with. These guys were seamen and explorers. It's unbelievable. What they overcame to survive. It really is. It reminds me that great line from Raymond Priestley, the British scientist explorer. I don't remember the exact quote, but he said something like, he was talking about polar explorers. He said, for scientific expertise, give me Robert Falcon Scott. He said, for efficiency of travel, give me Roald Amundsen. But if you're in a hopeless situation and all is lost and it just doesn't seem possible, get on your knees and pray for Ernest Shackleton. What a tribute that is. So when you realize what these guys overcame, and you read the story of the endurance, and I know people have. Then let's say you're facing some serious illness. Let's say, God forbid, you're combating cancer or something, and it's scary, it's terrifying. This is life threatening. I think any rational human being would be scared in such a situation. But then you can remember, what Shackleton and his guys did to survive. Is so extraordinary. If I have that same kind of dedication, I fight, for life the way those guys did. I have a good chance. I certainly have a fighting chance to overcome cancer and go on and live a healthy life. This is the kind of way that heroes can inspire us to be the best and most courageous versions of ourselves.
Yeah, and they show us what's possible. I think as human beings, we might get into a mindset of taking conventional wisdom or what we've known in the past as almost like barriers to what's possible. And then we see someone break through those barriers that we thought were impossible, and now we know it's possible. It's not impossible at all. So that's another source of the inspiration, don't you think?
Yeah, definitely. And that's a good way to put it. The heroes show us the human potential. What's possible to human beings.
Sure. Now, in your book, you you talk a lot about real life heroes. You mentioned George Washington Carver, Maria Montessori, uh, among many, many others. But you do use literature, examples of heroes from literature, and I'm kind of struck by this question of the values that literature can offer to a young mind in terms of presenting heroes that can't be done in biography, for example, right? So, on the one hand, biography, a factual biography, tells us what has been achieved, and then what kind of inspirational value or heroic value can literature offer that biography can't, Ben?
That's an interesting question, Joel. And they both can. The sight of heroes, real life or fictional, can both offer us inspiration. And when I was a kid, I weaned myself on the sight of heroes. I read both. I might have read the biography of Thomas Jefferson, and then read some Western novel. Anything that had heroes in it, real life or fictional, I ate it up. The great thing that literature, a really good friend of mine, who you know, Joel, Eric Daniels, is a professor of American history. And he told me once, very insightful point. He said to me, quote, "History is messy," unquote. And that's true of biographies. You have the good and the bad, and it's all mixed in, and you have to unpack it. In fiction, whether it's a drama or a novel, an author can stylize, and that is emphasize certain characteristics of a character, and leave out some of the a lot of the messy details, a lot of the trivialities. So you could show somebody, some character overcoming all kinds of external obstacles with dauntless courage, and you can leave out a whole bunch of stuff that's trivial. I mean, maybe the person suffers from severe sinus infections, whatever it is, which is part of real life, and it's annoying in real life, and it's painful in real life, but it's not the most salient point here. The most salient point here, that you're emphasizing, if you're discussing the real life character, then we need to know all these events of his or her life. But in literature and fiction, you could emphasize, you could leave out all of that stuff. It's secondary. What's primary is the courage, the commitment to life supporting values, the ultimate triumph, and you could focus on it in a way that you can't in biography or history. So that's one of the great things that literature does for us.
Well, you mentioned Ayn Rand earlier, and some of our audience may not know who Ayn Rand is, we could have a really long podcast interview just about her. But suffice to say, she was a great novelist and philosopher who answered a lot of the questions that we're talking about today. Yeah. And she had a great deal to say about literature, and particularly with the certain aspects of literature, like stylization that you mentioned. So let's talk about that a little bit. You mentioned the idea of how to emphasize certain aspects of a character, and then you also mentioned why, or that these aspects are chosen because they are essential for the nature of that character. So let's talk about that a little bit, because this really affects how we might evaluate something we would include in our curriculum. So can you give some examples of the kind of characters that a certain focus is given to essential traits that emphasize their heroic nature?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, we're discussing Ayn Rand, and if there are people out there who haven't read any, first thing I want to say, if you haven't read any of Ayn Rand's novels yet, in a way, I envy you, because you have the opportunity for the unique and unrepeatable experience of reading Ayn Rand's novels for the first time. the intellectual and emotional experience of reading The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged for the first time. So, envy you. I read them when I was a teenager, and I'm glad, and I'm certainly glad I did. And I certainly recommend people to read Anthem, The Fountainhead, and Atlas Shrugged. But The Fountainhead is my all-time favorite book. And Howard, well, we don't want to deal with spoilers here, right?
No spoilers.
Right. We can just say, so Howard Roark, revolutionary architect, he's got new ideas. He's opposed by virtually the entire intellectual profession, as was Ayn Rand herself in real life. And he's just indefatigable. He's indomitable. He moves ahead. Now he's extremely independent in his life, in his thinking about his career, about his friends, about his girlfriend, in every aspect of his life. And he just fills his life with all of these great things and persons. Now, Ayn Rand doesn't show us Howard Roark being depressed or being despondent or being thinking, what kind of a world do we live in? I mean, I created this great masterpiece and the world tears it down. Ayn Rand doesn't show us any of this. She's emphasizing his independence, that he knows the value. He creates these new ideas. He creates these great artworks. He knows the value of them, and it doesn't affect him that society rejects it. Now, in real life, somebody might be a Howard Roark and at times be despondent, at times be discouraged. If you know that you've created something great and the world mocks you or doesn't recognize you and they condemn you, it's painful, I would think, for most people. But that's not the main point here. The main point is not to create a character who might be this way in real life, but to show what independence looks like. The essentialized, undiluted, untainted version of independence that we could strive for. Maybe some of us actually attain it in real life, the way Howard Roark did in fiction. It's possible. But somebody who's discouraged at times in real life, it's still a hero. They do all these great things. But Ayn Rand stylized, and she's emphasizing this is what independence looks like. This is a real virtue. It promotes human life, and it's attainable. It may be very difficult, but it is attainable.
And in her book of essays, The Romantic Manifesto, she does make a distinction between certain styles of literature. She talks about the distinction between the romantic school of literature versus the naturalistic school that would make the naturalistic school that would make more of a focus on these sorts of non-essential things in order to service what the naturalists might call a fidelity to the reality of what they're studying. And whereas the romantic school, so this distinction that we're making here, the idea of a writer essentializing on certain characteristics in order to make their universe come alive, is something that is not necessarily prevalent in all writers. So there are different ways of accomplishing the goal of writing a certain kind of book, and your romantic writers would be more interested in essentializing these characteristics than a naturalistic writer would be. Right.
Yeah, Ayn Rand gives a very insightful definition of these competing literary schools. And she says Romanticism is essentially is the school that recognizes human beings have free will, and that we make choices. And consequently, the main characters in romantic novels, not always, but are often heroes. But what they always are is purposeful. They have certain goals in mind, and they push ahead, against all obstacles to try and achieve their goals. Like we were discussing Howard Roark, he's got all kinds of obstacles in his way to try to achieve like I said, we don't want to give away any spoilers how it turns out, but to try to achieve commercial success in the field of architecture on his own terms. In like that great Frank Sinatra song. He wants to do it my way.
He did it his way.
Yeah, and that's like Howard Rourke's theme song. And so this is necessarily then and logically the focus of the story. It's on his drive for values, and it's very essentialized. And so if he's if he goes on vacation, and spends a week at the seashore, sun in fun, having sun and fun, okay, that's good, but there's no point in spending much time on that. You mentioned that he went on vacation. Then he's back, he's refreshed, and now he's moving ahead towards his goal. That's what a romantic novelist focuses on, the striving for the achievement of my purpose. Whereas the naturalist school, as Ayn Rand points out, is philosophically is determinist. People don't have free will. They're not making choices. They're buffeted by social forces, whether the family or society as a whole, or for the Marxists, they're the oppressed victims of the capitalist system. And so then a lot of the details of they're not moving purposefully towards some goal. So what are you going to talk about? Well, what's left to talk about is the mundane details of their everyday pedestrian life, and how they're just kind of pushed around by various social forces. And so we need the description of the social forces. My mother did this, and the factory owner is, factory owner had all these prejudices against his workers, and you need a lot of a lot of those details to show how these social forces oppress or victimize this poor guy whose life is listless and consumed with ennui, and he's going nowhere.
So now we started down this rabbit hole because we began talking about the value of heroism and the usefulness of it. And one of the things that strikes me in our conversation here is that writers of novels can convey not just a life, but an entire universe. And by that, I mean, they can tell us how they see the universe. They can tell us if they think that human beings have agency, they can control their lives, that, or are they ruled by fate or God or the forces beyond their control? And they can also tell us in the embodiment of a kind of a character that they represent some code of morality, some strong code of values. And so that if we want to come back to that universe, all we have to do is think, what would, in your example of the Fountainhead, what would Howard Rourke do? Or what would Jean Valjean do? By connecting ourselves to that character, we can be in touch with the universe that the author created, and that becomes another use for literature that maybe biography can't give us. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think I think if we read a really good biography of some great person, and Edison's a good example, because it seems clear that he neglected his children, which is that's a moral failing. You bring children into the world, you have a moral responsibility to spend a lot of quality time with them. But but I think a rational biographer will recognize, okay, we discussed this, but the preponderance of the work has got to be about the achievements. This is what's so extraordinary and distinctive to him. There's a lot of deadbeat dads, but there's only one Thomas Edison. So biography can do that, but literature is the romantic school we're talking about, with these heroic characters who choose their own values and then move ahead purposefully in the attempt to achieve, to achieve their goals, is of its very nature. It's much more stylized. Well, at least it gives the author the capability of emphasizing this, and you're leaving out all the details, all the inconsequential, messy, as Professor Daniels put it, all the messy parts that are actually real, but trivial relative to this character story. And I think a great work of literature can inspire us that way. Whether it's a novel, a play, a film, it can inspire us in a way that you walk away from it being uplifted. Like, wow, the world starts to take on the hue of heroism. It's like, wow, maybe that really is possible. Maybe this kind of achievement, maybe the world is such that these kind of achievements are possible, and I could do this in my own life, at a level commensurate with my own talents, that I could reach my goals. That's the kind of universe we live in.
And it does change a person. It really, if you connect with a particular kind of hero, it can make you stand up straighter. It can make you look people in the eye when you never did before. I was wearing my Captain America T-shirt to the grocery store, and I was talking with the cashier, who immediately noticed my shirt, and just his face lit up. He stood straighter and he said, "I love your shirt." And then we started talking about Captain America there was no one else in line. But so we talked about some of those moments that were thrilling in those recent movies. And I was struck by the effect that this kind of a fictional character could have on a person. And so it's more than just an intellectual exercise that's floating. It really can affect a person.
Absolutely, and that includes these characters at a very popular level, where there's no deep themes. It's good versus evil, and sometimes the evil is very simple. Sometimes they're just criminals. So I grew up, and you mentioned Captain America. I was always a Marvel guy. I mean, I love the Marvel comics. To me, the DC characters were very one-dimensional. Yeah, it's some appeal to heroes,
we can have an entire podcast episode about that too. I think you're right, by the way, about that. That I think the DC characters tended to have their origins in a world that didn't really value complexity in characters very much, and the Marvel characters came later, and the original creators of those characters were very concerned with having them not just be more complex, but they had more complex conflicts as well, and they had inner conflicts when the DC characters didn't.
Yeah, like I said, I like DC because they're heroes, but it was so shallow that even as a kid, I was thinking, well, Clark Kent puts on a pair of glasses and they don't recognize him. Come on, even at 10 years old. But a good example here, and I have great admiration for Stan Lee, the founder of Marvel, who just passed away, I think, last year. He's like 95. Good, long, rich life for him. But take Spider-Man, for example, because he was this Peter Parker. He was a classic nerd. He's a brilliant scientist, but he wasn't too good socially. He was physically underdeveloped. And picked on by the bullies, ironically, Flash Thompson, who loves Spider-Man. It's a nice touch. But, he's got all these personal problems with his aunt is sick, and the girls don't like him. He so much. He's in love with this girl, and she's not interested. He's got all these personal problems. And it doesn't stop him from performing these heroic deeds. Spider-Man goes out. He's usually fighting criminals, but sometimes all kinds of different bad guys, and he almost always triumphs. He courageously faces life-threatening situations, and I think for somebody who's got their own problems in life, and like I said, I grew up in a crazy family, so I could relate to the kind of personal problems that Peter Parker had, but it never stopped him from being a hero. That's what I love. That's what I loved about Spider-Man and about the Marvel universe. These guys often had problems, but it didn't stop them from being heroes. That's what I loved about it.
Yeah, and it is important to think that heroes become much more interesting when they have great antagonists or great conflicts to fight against. Because a hero who is just able to accomplish their goals without having that and I mean this in a literary sense, they're just not very interesting if they don't have great obstacles to work through.
Right, and sometimes those obstacles are internal.
Right,
You know,
and that's actually what made a lot of those Marvel characters so interesting.
Right. If somebody's actually fearless, that's irrational. I mean, when in real life, let's say they shoot machine guns at you, and you're not afraid. That means you don't value your life very much. But courage is when you are afraid, when it's rationally appropriate to be afraid, and yet you recognize the value here, whether it's liberty or my own life or the lives of my loved ones or whatever it is. I'm going to stand up to the danger, and I'm afraid, but I'm going to stand up to the danger. And speaking of somebody who, going back before my time, but that lasted until I was a kid, was John Wayne, and a lot of the Western films John Wayne made, and a lot of World War II movies that John Wayne made. And one of those Westerns, I can't remember which one, was when he said, courage is when, I think this is the quote, courage is when you're scared to death, but you saddle up anyway. Now that really gets the essence of it.
So we did a unit on the Red Badge of Courage, the Stephen Crane novel, as kind of an exploration into that theme as well, and we put him in our hero section because while the character of that novel doesn't start out courageous, or he doesn't start out at where he will end up, it's the journey of how he gets there that is so interesting, and then we can see the process by which he can become heroic. And that's another way that literature can serve that cause, to provide a template, an example of the journey as well.
Yeah, the arc of the character's life. Now, long time since I read that book, so refresh my memory. The main character runs from battle the first time, right?
That's right.
And then he recovers himself, steals himself, and comes back and faces the. Yeah, now I could relate to that because I would run from battle every time. I'm a devout coward. I wouldn't come back. I would just run. I think I would run away. But I could relate.
And the truth is, he would have been slaughtered at that battle. So there is a sort of a rationality to it, but I mean that the important point to make is that he learns from it, and he chooses a better direction for himself. And there's also a deeper issue of his values. He comes to realize that he couldn't live with himself if he were to continue running away. And that's another great lesson or template that so heroes aren't necessarily fully formed in literature, and that's a great value to us because we can see that struggle.
Right, and they can come in all shapes and sizes. There may be a hero who's that way their whole life, springs fully developed from Zeus's head, like Athena. Did in the Greek myths, and is heroic from childhood. But then that's great. You go, wow, I'm impressed. I admire this person. I want to do my best to be like this person. But then there's the more true to life heroes that you're talking about, who their character is the characterization is an arc. It goes from like first battle, to use that example. I ran. I was cowardly. I ran away, which I would do. But when they say experience is the best teacher, now you know what to expect. You steel yourself. You come back. And say, oh my God! I can't live with myself if I run away. And you see the character grow. You see the character become more courageous. So you see that development is a great value that literature provides for us. It reminds me, there's all different kinds of fearsome dangers to face. The inner demons, we know today from the field of psychology. And what's her name? Joanne Greenberg, whose pen name was Hannah Green, wrote I Never Promised You a Rose Garden, which is a very good story about, it's a fictionalized account of her real life struggle with inner demons and, and real mental illness. The real life struggle, the fictionalized account of her real life struggle to regain her mental health. And it's a tremendous battle, and it's very heroic. Inner demons can be just as scary as outer demons. And you see the character grow, through the struggle in the story, and you're with her all the way, applauding, every step forward that she takes. And this is a great service that literature provides. It shows us that even if we're not there yet, and there's a struggle to get where we want to go, it's doable. It's possible. People do it. They've done it, and so can I.
And so I'm just going to give a little plug to that lesson that we created. It's available for free if anyone wants to check it out from our website, PisanAcademy.com. We actually paired that novel with the autobiography, one of the autobiographies of Frederick Douglass, and the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, as a way to sort of triangulate choices that heroes make, and have our students look for the connections between those two. And Frederick Douglass is also a great real life hero that one can emulate and take inspiration from. I know you have a lot of things that, a lot of admiration for that man as well.
Frederick Douglass? Oh my God, yeah, he's self-educated as a slave, escaped from slavery, became a brilliant writer and speaker on behalf of abolitionism, and his essay on the self-made man is just brilliant, and I think should be widely read today, where slavery in the United States isn't an issue in that sense, that race-based slavery is not an issue anymore, but the idea that we're molded by society and there are no self-made men is very prevalent, and that we should all serve society rather than our own interests. And I think Frederick Douglass is very relevant in that way. Oh yeah, he's a towering hero, and I love the face. Just that look. This is a tough guy. This is a guy who's gonna.
He's a badass. He's an intellectual badass.
Yeah, he's gonna stand up to any obstacles, and he's, and he's not gonna back away when he knows that he's right.
Yeah, we had a video on his library, and it's very instructive to see what Frederick Douglass read. He was inspired by figures from literature too. He read Shakespeare. He understood the value of literature and its inspirational nature, and he had literary heroes that allowed him to escape his fate. So that's certainly another point in the favor of the value of literature. So in just wrapping up on our episode today, I know that there may be a lot of people in our audience who may be convinced now that it's a good thing to introduce their children to heroes in literature. So how would one go about researching, finding great heroes to introduce their child to through literature?
Well, first of all, what ages are we talking about? We're talking about
our heroic unit, our level, the level in which we emphasize heroes as the sort of the central theme. That's middle school, 7 through 8, and we sort of went in that direction because it's sort of preconceptual in child's development. They don't really find out. Your mileage may vary, but most children don't develop the really deeply philosophical capacity until they don't get introduced to it really, or not until around high school or so. So we wanted to introduce heroes as a way to give students a view of the universe that they might be able to aspire to. Right. And so that's why we're focusing on middle school. But, this is open-ended for parents that are listening to this.
Right, and I think it's good to start at a very early age. I mean, using phonics, we could teach children to read. Age 5, children can learn to read, especially if you have them. Pick out when they're younger than that. Pick out some children's book that they want, and you read it to them, and they realize at an early age that there's things in books that interest them, and then they want to learn to read, just like they want to learn to ride a bike, and so they're motivated. And then by the time the kid's 5 or 6, I would think some of the great children's books, Peter Pan, The Secret Garden, Anne of Green Gables. These are stories about very heroic people that I think, and heroic kids that, and there's others, I'm sure, that children, will respond to. But there's a lot of literature. You talk about middle school. There's a lot of literature there that focuses on heroes. There was even today, popular culture shows us, whether it's secret agents or detectives or superheroes. Popular culture shows us that people want heroes. And I mean, when I was a kid, probably still some of these books around. The girls all read the Nancy Drew novels, and the boys read the Hardy Boys. Yeah, I mean, I used to swap with some of the girls in school, and I liked Nancy Drew. I mean, I liked the Hardy Boys too. But Nancy Drew was, first of all, she was intelligent. Second of all, she's plucky, and it's good that if you have a daughter, you say, look, this is what girls can do. This is what girls are capable of. But by the time you get to age 11, 12, 13, there's a lot of hero books there. Shane is one of my, Jack Schaefer's great novel, Shane, about a very, very, gunfighter with great prowess and great benevolence.
I don't know how we made it through this entire podcast episode without mentioning Shane.
Well, no, good, right. Other than Ayn Rand's books, it's like my all-time favorite novel. And I never wanted to be a gunfighter, believe me. But it's,
I'm with you, man. That is something else, and that's another one that we have a unit for. So we include that, and we introduce that to our 7th and 8th graders. It's
beautiful book. Yeah. Recommend for any age, but certainly by 11, 12, 13, kids can read Shane. The heroism and just the goodwill, the willingness to risk my life. I won't want to give away, the rest of the story, but the willingness to risk my life for the people I love, is so moving. And there's a lot of hero books that kids at that age can appreciate. I think Cyrano de Bergerac is great. There's a lot of hero literature that parents who are interested could find that that is certainly appropriate for kids at that age. Ayn Rand's novelette Anthem, little complex, the use of the language, but I think motivated, intelligent 11, 12, 13-year-old kids could understand Anthem and get a lot out of it.
We tend to introduce Anthem right around the high school level.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
Yeah. But do you know of any resources? I mean, besides Khan Academy, but any resources, any methods that parents can use for researching the idea of heroes? Of course, they can read your book. That's a good starting point.
Yeah, they can definitely read Heroes, Legends, Champions, Why Heroism Matters. They go on my website, andrewbernstein.net, if you don't mind me putting in a plug.
Not at all. By the way, to the listeners, andrewbernstein.net is a treasure trove of good stuff. There's blog there's writings, essays, videos on previous interviews you've done, and your own list of writings. I didn't mention this earlier, but you've written both nonfiction and fiction. You've written several novels, and so there's a lot to look at andrewbernstein.net.
Thank you, Joe. I don't know of a specific method other than, I'm a lifelong hero worshiper. I wish there was a method. I just nosed around the library, and today you can do it on Amazon. You don't even have to leave your house. But I just nosed around the library and in the fiction and nonfiction section and found, this in biography and history, I knew that, Julius Caesar, military conqueror is not my favorite, but still he did these. I knew who he was. I knew he did these enormous, these some enormous things, some of which were great. And so, I would read in anything that smacked of larger than life. And I think that my method was just very, trial and error, very.
Yeah. Did you read Plutarch's Lives when you were growing up?
No, I read Plutarch's Lives much later. But
That's
Plutarch,
another great source.
yeah, good point. Plutarch's Lives, where the Roman author who compared great Romans with great Greeks.
Yeah, and it's even it's very readable. I think that's definitely something that even maybe not every middle schooler can read, but certainly high schoolers.
Yeah, by high school.
But if you want to talk about larger than life characters, oh
yes.
My God!
And Plutarch's a hero worshiper. He admires, these, and he compares them. Caesar and Alexander. He compares them to each other. He really admires the heroes. He's got a real feel for them. But there's a lot out there, and Amazon is great. And there's a lot of material from the past that's very heroic that went out of print and now has been reprinted. By on Amazon's platform. What is it? Create Space, I think. That's available. That helped me in doing the research for the hero book, because some of the writings that I mentioned before, William James's writings on heroes was out of print, but it was brought back, and Thomas Carlyle's book on heroes, but it was brought back into print on Create Space, which I think is Amazon's self-publishing platform.
I'm so glad you brought that up, by the way. We have been doing a lot of research ourselves. I'm convinced that there is an absolute treasure chest of heroic fiction that was written in the late Victorian era that has just gone out of print, forgotten about. I've read some of them, but I know there's a lot more out of there that have just been forgotten because of the cultural trends of the 20th century. And
right.
One of the things that we're doing is we're working with a lot of used booksellers that we know to find some of these works and bring them back to light. So that's another thing that we'll be doing. But
we want a method. What a method! One of your friends, personal friends, who has a penchant for calling you McCrae, so you know who I'm talking about.
Oh, yeah.
Has read I searched the whole world to get all those swashbuckling books from the.
That's right.
Century. He's got a whole library of them. So if you want a resource, you can talk to your buddy.
Oh wow, that's a great idea. Well, so in closing, let's tell the audience what you're working on now, and what can our audience look forward to seeing from you in the future.
Well, thank you, Joel. First of all, I'm writing a book on American education. Rudolph Flesh's famous book, Why Johnny Can't Read. Mine is Why Johnny Still Can't Read or Write, Spell, or Understand Math, or what we can do about it. So there's all of the depressing stuff on how we got into this disaster. But then at the end is the practical steps to fix it. But I need more fun in my life than that. So I'm writing
That's a cesspool.
Yeah. What did H.L. Mencken say a long time ago? That all it needs to fix American education is to burn down the teacher colleges and hang all the professors.
I could not agree more. And we will definitely need to have you back on the show to talk about the state of education. We'll have to wear nose plugs in order to talk about it.
Yes.
But you were about to say what you're working on for fun.
Yeah, I just want to be clear, in a very violent world, I don't literally believe we should burn down the schools and hang professors. But no, I'm working on a series of hard-boiled detective novels, love stories about a Brooklyn College philosophy professor. It takes place in Brooklyn. His name is Anthony Justice. He's a detective. He's known as Tony Just. He's wooing a psychologist named Lisa Flowers. He's deeply in love with her. And I think Tony Just and Lisa Flowers make a very hot, some of the sex scenes are intense. So I'm working on, those are the things I'm working on. And you mentioned my website. If anybody cares to contribute to my Patreon account to support this work, they could link to Patreon to become a patron, even if it's just $5 a month. They can link to that from my website.
Absolutely. And definitely check out andrewbernstein.net. So thanks once again. And I really mean it. We need to have you back. We have a lot of things to talk about, education, other kinds of literature. So we will do that. And thank you once again for appearing on the Literature for Homeschoolers podcast.
You're welcome, Joel. This was a lot of fun. So thank you for having me on.
Thanks to our guest, Dr. Andrew Bernstein. Remember to check out his website at andrewbernstein.net. If you like this episode, tell your friends. Tell us what you'd like to see. You can reach us at info@bizonacademy.com. If you're interested in a literature curriculum that uses heroic themes, check out our website at bizonacademy.com. Our mission is to give parents everything they need to teach their children the very best literature that Western civilization has to offer, and by supplementing those great works with historical readings to put those stories in context and bring them to life. It's not just literature, it's literature plus. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.